Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Author Spotlight. I'm your host, Cynthia Martin, along with yourauthorhub.com, where we get together and we talk to authors about their books, about their process, and everything to do with writing and reading. Of course, that's one of my hobbies. So I'm a lover of books and I'm a lover of understanding and talking to people about their ideas and the contents of their books. So we have a special guest again today, and I'm excited to introduce him and his book. I'm looking forward to the content. I've not actually been able to talk to him before, and so this is going to be very interesting. So today we have Ray Pourfarzib, and he's going to talk to us about his book. Welcome, Ray. Tell us about your book, the title, and how you got started with this book.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Cynthia, and thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure speaking with you and your audience. So the title of my book, this is my third book that I published, is called What's God's Revelation? And, a little bit of background on myself. My family and I migrated from Middle East to the United States in the mid 1970s. As a Muslim, I converted to Christianity in my teenage years, and I grew up in Florida and spent most of my youth in Florida, and that's where I was baptized as well. I received my Bachelor of Science in biology, and then attended a graduate program in Atlanta, Georgia, and received my Ph.D. in pharmaceutical sciences / pharmacology. In 2016, 2017, I was ordained as a deacon, and I've been serving in that ministry for the past 8-9 years. If you were to sort of describe me, I'm a Christian first, father, husband, a scientist, and then an author. I've published over 70 plus papers in the scientific area, and then published 3 books in the past 5 years, and working on my 4th book as we speak. But I'm excited. I'm excited to speak with you about this book that was just published. But just to share with you sort of the first 2 books, I published a book entitled What is Satan Up to? A Christian Perspective in 21st Century. And the focus of that book, this was during the COVID time and during all the stuff that was going on. And basically, I wanted to sort of discuss, the spiritual warfare that's been happening ever since Genesis, and we're facing it today. And I basically explored, the current events, examined sort of world history, life experience, the Bible, and demonstrated how there is a spiritual warfare that's live and kicking. And I provide examples on that, and also the chaos and confusion that we have faced, but we continue to face, and how Satan's working hard to separate us from God. So that was the first book. And then the second book I published back in 2022, right before the Easter holiday. So it was really warm to know that the book is coming out, and it's talking about, and the title of the book was The Anointed One, 350 Reasons Jesus is the Messiah.
Oh, wow.
And basically that book, like I said, came out during Easter holiday, perfect timing. And the objective of that book was to examine the 10 objections that I have received, and also I've heard from our Jewish friends and colleagues, as well as my scientist friends, atheists who don't believe in the Bible. The objections they throw out, I list the top 10, but there's more than the 10. But
Sure.
the few that I tackled was like, the New Testament was corrupt. There is no mention of Jesus in the Old Testament. Jesus did not fulfill the messianic prophecies. He was not crucified. He's not salvation. He's not Son of God, and all that. So I addressed all that. And basically, what I did for the second book, I took the Old Testament, the Hebrew prophecies, and basically talked about those 350 prophecies that foretold about the Messiah, and I showed how those were fulfilled in the New Testament. And so that's sort of the second book. But really, my love was, and I've always wanted to write this, and I just was hesitant to write it till About 2 years ago, I felt, God speaking to me that, I need to write this and I need to explain why I converted from Islam to Christianity. So the third book, as I mentioned, it's called What is God's Revelation? And it was just recently published. It was right after the Easter holiday, which is really bizarre. Had it timed right
Got
by
something
the Easter
about
holiday.
Easter. Okay.
Exactly. So this just came out in print. I just actually received my book a few days ago. So it's exciting and this this was perfect. I don't know if you knew, but we were supposed to talk about my second book a few months ago, but I came down with COVID. So this was
Oh,
perfect timing that we had to postpone our conversation and be able to speak today and the timing of the third book. So I appreciate your flexibility and be able to talk about this book,
yeah.
but also highlight the other books as well. And again, the reason I wrote the book was a long time desire to answer two key questions people put forth in front of me. The first one being, as a scientist, I'm always confronted by atheists wanting to know how I'm so confident that there is a God, there's a creator. And then the second, question that I get because of converting, people do ask, why did you convert to Christianity, and what makes you so sure that Jesus is the way to heaven? Many people, sort of argue and say that there's many religions out there, and there's other ways to heaven. So I that was really why I wanted to write and explain, what is it to be a Christian and what Jesus did on the cross. So that's sort of the gist of the book. The book is to address those two questions and tackle the top nine faiths. So the nine faiths includes atheism. I consider that
That's
as a
true.
religion.
Exactly. Yep.
And then I handle Islam, Buddhism, Confucianism, Judaism, Christianity, and a few other religions. So the top nine faiths, but the top eight religions according to number of members they have. So that's how I mean, if I was to tackle, as you know, there are over 4,500 religions out there,
Yeah.
and to be able to tackle all that is impossible. So this book was going long anyways, just tackling those eight religions and atheism. So
Yeah.
that's basically the gist of sort of who I am and I know what I've done with authoring this book.
Well, I appreciate you being so personable because when we hear your bio that you have all these degrees, including a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, and you are a scientist, it puts you off a little bit in the thinking that, oh my, he's way much more intelligent than I'm going to be able to relate to. So I appreciate the fact that you're very relatable. I do have some questions. You talked about your first book. Um, I'm sure I can't remember the name of it, something about Satan, and I was trying to write down, and I trying to pay attention and write down isn't always really easy. I appreciate you bringing out those three different books because they're seemingly different books and from different perspectives. I appreciate that you have a well-rounded and doesn't Christianity, it really addresses things from all different levels, right, and all different perspective. It's not just one. So the I'm really getting somewhere, so I apologize. But
Oh, that's good.
the second thing that you said that I would want to really bring out is that you talked about this book that just came out, and God's timing is always perfect. We don't always understand it, so I appreciate that as well. But I undertaking of you answered so many questions because I was thinking, how did he determine? And you told me it was by number, so I can see that. But how did you decide that you were going to tackle these eight different religions? And I run into the question, or not necessarily the question, the comment often that all religions are the same and they're all pointing to there's only, they'll agree with you that are with us that there's only one God, but they think in just different religions they just call him by a different name and they have a different revelation of him. So are those the kinds of things that you address in the book, or is it just what they believe and how they see things? Explain a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So I'll just explain sort of you know why I wrote and what I wrote and how I wrote it.
Yeah. Perfect.
Because when you talk about God's revelation, people think about, oh, you're writing about Book of Revelation, the last book in New Testament. I mean, of course, I use some of the verses in Revelation, but the gist of the book was really to tackle those two questions. Number one, is there a God? How do you know there's a God? And then tackle the second question is, how do you know which faith is the true faith? And what evidence do you have? So, basically, what I did with respect to atheism, I tackled the question of sort of nature, and
Mhm.
took the nature and
Yeah.
put it in their sort of in their language that I talked a lot about uh, theory of evolution, and I talked a lot about sort of you know just the concept of how some of the governments are set up, like communism. They don't believe in God. They push God away from people. And so I used science, I used genetics, I used sort of the evidence that we have in showing that there is a creator. You may want to call it God, or you may want to call it something else. There is a creator. And I spent a lot of time in chapter 2 to share sort of all the natural laws that's out there. I talk about just the genetic makeup of life. I talk about how it's impossible. The probability, the statistics is impossible to say, okay, you give enough time, you're going to create life. So I highlight a lot of that, and I also highlight scientists that are Christians, or believers in a creator. Some of them may not believe that, they may not believe in Christianity, but they believe that there's a creator. So I highlight those people as well, and then talk about those that do believe that, we're all created by God, and that God revealed himself to us, and he wants to have a personal relationship. So I highlight those. And I also talk about atheists that really went to sort of prove that there is no God, and became Christians, like C.S. Lewis. So I like his sort of story or testimony. Josh McDowell is another one that I highlight. He wrote the book Evidence That Deserves a Verdict. So I highlight Josh McDowell, who was an atheist in college. He wanted to show that there is no God.
Right.
And after doing his research, he became a Christian. And that's really what I emphasize in this book, is like, don't take my word for it. Do your own research, but don't be sort of naive. Don't take, whoever is telling you this is true or that's true. Do your research, do your studies, and hopefully you come to the same conclusion I did. The reason I wrote this book was to hopefully start that dialogue, to start
Yeah.
that debate, and allow people to read it, and go for and go look at the literature, and find out for themselves, what I have wrote. And if there's anything that disagree with, let's have that debate. So so that was the first question I wanted to address, was that, is there a God? And no doubt in my mind, there is a God, there's a creator. There's no way we are alive. There's no way life can exist without a creator, without a designer. So I explained that. And then the second part of it is like, okay, there is a God. How do you know your God or their God or this and that is the true God? So basically, what I use, and the subtitle of the book is, using the Mad Litmus test through prophecy. So that's what I did. I used the prophecy, and I know that, sort of, if you believe that God wants to have a personal relationship with you, then he will reveal himself. So the question I asked is that, you know, if God reveals himself, how has he revealed himself in these various religions? And I took, like I said, the top 8 religions by size, but there's so many other religions that you could tackle. And there are a lot of books out there that talks about cults, talks about different denominations, stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
didn't want to, tackle that either. I just wanted to tackle the top 8 religions. And the 5 questions I came up with really came from Revelations 19:10, when John was met with an angel, and the angel said, worship God, don't worship me, for it is the spirit of prophecy who bears testimony to Jesus. So that was sort of my foundation. It is the spirit of prophecy that bears testimony to Jesus. So I use that as, okay, if the religions are real and truthful, then God's revelation would provide that sort of knowledge to us. And the
Right.
five questions that I tried to address, I used in the spirit of prophecy was there a prophecy written claiming that the religious leader would be a messenger from God? For example, Muhammad
Mhm.
or Buddha.
Yeah.
Were there people before them, prophets before them, that explained, hey, this person is going to come and he's going to do X, Y, and Z? That was number one. Did that religious leader perform any miracles? That was number two. Third question I raised was, did the religious leader provide any future prophetic messages? Number four, did that leader explain the existence of the universe and life? And number five, did that religious leader explain what happens in the afterlife? So those were the things that I only focused on, and I examined each religion and basically highlighted sort of in each chapter. I break it down from, sort of background, their prophet. I talk about sort of their belief and their faith, and then I tackle those five questions. And then I also highlight at the end of each chapter some of the testimonies why, if you were, like, let's say, a believer of Hinduism, why
Mhm.
did you convert to Christianity? What were those rationale reasons why you thought that, hey, Christianity was the way to go? So that's sort of how the book is broken down. So I tackled those, and then at the end of another thing that came to me after I wrote the book is that there's so many questions people still have that ask.
Mhm.
So I put an FAQ document at the end of the chapter, or end of the book. I believe it's chapter 10. And I highlighted some of the key questions that come. And I think I came up with like 16, 17 questions that people do ask and want to know. So I used that FAQ sort of a format to answer some questions that I couldn't tackle in the previous chapter. So that's sort of the gist of the book. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it did. I'm fascinated, to be honest. I, as I've already mentioned on all my programs, I'm a lover of books, and so I do love books. But I love the aspect of looking at the different religions because I don't think it's done well or often. And I have had people ask me, I teach a lot of classes and I do that sort of thing outside of this. And I've had people say, I would like to come to a class that explained all the different religions. And I thought, oh, wow, that would be a huge tackling over, that would be huge to try to really take a look, an honest look at what they believe and why they believe it and in comparison as well. So it looks like you've done the work already. If I do choose to do the class, it sounds like your book is going to be one of my textbooks. So I have a question about do you tackle new age at all? Is that a religion? Is that something that you look at in the book?
I don't. So again, there's so many religions that we could
Yeah.
tackle, and New Age, nature, Christian Scientology, even Mormonism, and other denominations, and other sort of religions. I don't tackle, but it's the same concept. It's the same concept. Has God revealed His plan to that individual, sort of prophet or the messenger? And
Right.
if you have it, then I'd love to see it. But from my experience, these nine, there were only two religions that I could see clearly that God revealed Himself through His prophets and prophecies, and that's Judaism and Christianity, which both go hand in hand. You can't have one without the
Right.
other. And I talk about, the early Christians were Jews.
Yeah. Jesus
So
wasn't a Christian. Yeah, exactly.
exactly, yeah, exactly. So it's a God's revelation from Genesis to Revelation, and it's not about sort of, well, we're divided here, and you're a Christian, you're a Jew. I show that in the book that basically, the Old Testament talked about His plan for salvation, and in New Testament He fulfilled that salvation through Jesus Christ. So it's a continuous thing. So you can't divide it. So those were the two that I could clearly see that there were prophets. God had a clear plan. He revealed His plan on His time, which you mentioned. Timing of God.
Mhm.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That was the timing. I showed the sort of in Daniel and other books. There was a specific time that God revealed when the Savior will come, and that happened exactly when He said it was going to happen. So I talk all about that, and I show the miracles. and what Jesus talks about, about afterlife, about heaven, and so forth. So I addressed those 5 questions for each religion, and that was my concluding remark, is that there's one way, and that is through Jesus Christ. And he does say, the door is narrow. So,
Yeah.
I just hope that, and my hope is that through this, I don't, number one, offend people, but number
Right.
two, provide enough evidence for people to see, for them to go and do their research. And my hope, my prayer is that they can know who Jesus is and why he was crucified. So that's sort of my hope, that people get to know him. And I had a lot of questions when I was
Yeah.
a Muslim, and a lot of questions to me was very sort of foggy. But by getting into the Bible, reading it, understanding it, I was able to say, okay, what is the fact and what is fiction? So
The two very important things that you said right there. First off, I think that what happens a lot of times, people just, and I don't like this word, but it's very descriptive, they regurgitate what they've heard. They
correct,
don't even know why they say they believe what they believe. And
correct,
and let's be honest, a lot of Christians are that way. They
absolutely,
don't know why they believe that. It's something that they were taught. It's something that they were told is truth, but they don't have anything that they can go and say, this is why I believe what I believe. And I think that's very important. Whatever we believe, we need to have something to stand on. So I appreciate that. Secondly, I love the idea that you're opening up the dialogue, that you're saying, I'm asking you to think on your own. I'm
that's right,
asking you to open up the door to take a look at these things,
right,
because you and I know that when we open up the door to searching, God shows up.
yeah,
He does. He shows us truth. If we're looking for truth, He will show us truth
yeah,
if we're really looking for it. If we're looking just to defend our position, that's something different than looking for truth.
that's right,
And I like the idea of opening the door of dialogue through this comparative and this litmus test. Like you said, I think you said there was 5 questions. I
yeah,
appreciate that you looked at it in all of those. Also, I want to make the comment that I agree that Christianity and Judaism is really not two; it's one,
yes,
but it's looked at as two, because some, they'll take this part or they'll take this part, but really you have to have the whole in
that's right,
order to get the whole story. So
that's right.
I appreciate that. Um, it probably wasn't fair to ask the question about the new age. I'll just submit that, because that's so loose. It's pretty much what a person believes for themselves, and
Right.
it's very, very loose. So I apologize about that, but I wanted to see where you go with it. So
So the new age, you really tackle it. I tackle it in atheism. I mean, and nature and all that. So it's tackled. So it's tackled in that sense. I come from that angle of, sort of, we're gods.
yeah,
We
exactly.
can,
We can decide, right?
we can decide exactly,
Yep.
and it's all relative, right? How you feel.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there's no sort of right or wrong. It's gray area,
Yeah.
and today's, your belief may change tomorrow. So it's very sort of heavily grayish area, with the truth sort of not in existence, right? The
Uh,
truth can change, as sort of they believe, as we evolve and continue to evolve. Then truth today may be something else tomorrow. So that's sort of, I addressed
something
it
absolutely.
in chapter 2 under atheism, but I didn't tackle other religions outside those. I briefly highlighted sort of the ancient, just briefly, ancient religions, like such as like the Romans and the Greeks, and so forth. So briefly, I touched on that, but like I said, if I was to write, it's just impossible. It would be volumes and volumes of books to try to
Yeah.
address all these other, belief systems and faiths. But I figured, I did the 80-20 rule. So, you got 80% of the world population has some kind of faith in these 8 religions, and then,
Mhm.
of course, you have, 7% of the population in the world, I believe they're atheists or agnostics. So I tackled those sort of large population, tried to throw a net and get sort of 80% of population. But you're right. There are other people that believe in other religions that is not captured in this book. So
Well, I was just very much thinking about my husband and I read through the Bible, and we every year, and we're reading through. We just finished the book of Judges. Not my
Okay.
favorite book, to be honest. I would rather read Leviticus or Numbers. We just read through Judges, and over and over, I actually kept track because I was trying to that, and they did, and it ends. The Judges ends with the statement, my interpretation of, and they all did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And that's what reminds me of in New Age and some of these. They're doing what looks right in their own eyes,
Right.
and it results in a mess. Couple of ideas as you're talking. I'm writing down things that I want to make sure and ask you about. So I like to make sure we put everything right out on the table. So hopefully I can communicate the question correctly. I've already alluded to the fact that you're a scientist and that you have a PhD, and you're scholarly. I appreciate that, but you're personable, so we can chat on a regular level. I just consider myself a regular person. So, is this book, would this be considered a scholarly work? Like said, I could use it as a textbook, or is it just your everyday person can get this book and understand it?
Yeah, so I really try to write it to address both, that it could be used in, sort of people that want to know, that have questions late term. So I try to write it as simple as possible, but also try to write it, for people that are in, evangelical schools, or want to be pastors, or want to go to mission field. And, maybe they're going over to Middle East or Asia, where they face, Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and so forth. So I try to tackle both, and hopefully I've accomplished that, or that anyone can read it, but also help students that want to go in the mission field or want to teach, or even in Bible study, Bible school or Bible study. They could use this book to, because when I was a young Christian, in our Bible study, that was a lot of questions that would come forwards. Like, okay, how do we know these other religions are not also way to get to God and get to heaven? So you're right. There aren't that many books that tackle that, and the books that do tackle religion, they basically just highlight religion, but
Hmm.
they don't take a stand on the litmus test of comparing and contrasting different religions, and looking at God's revelation and God's prophecy and prophetic messages. So I try to be different with this book, is to take it to that next level
Yeah.
for Christians, and as well as non-Christians, to address the question, did God reveal himself, and how did he reveal himself, and to which prophets did he reveal himself? So that's sort of the focus of each chapter. I try to address that through the ancient text, through various sort of experts, and also testimonies of people that were in that faith. So that's sort of, I use all that to pull together the information and write this book.
Um, when you mentioned, you wrote the book for dialogue, I agree that, and I already mentioned it, but I'll mention it again, that there aren't books out there. I've looked,
Right.
because I did consider doing the class, and I thought, oh wow, this would take forever to do the research. So thank you.
Yeah. You're
But
welcome.
I think it's important that we be aware, because we live in societies where we're rubbing arms with people who do believe differently than we do. And we don't just shut the door. That isn't God's way, to just shut the door on people because they don't know.
Right.
I like the idea of being able to understand where, kind of, maybe a little bit of where they're coming from, and being able to open up the door for dialogue, to be able to know the differences, because we're ignorant of other religions. Totally don't know. Which leads me to the next question. You mentioned that you came from outside of the United States, that you immigrated here, and that you were a Muslim prior. So, talk about the difference between, because I don't have the option to talk to someone who has come from being a Muslim to come to become a Christian. So, talk about those differences and what helped you make that switch.
Right. So what stood out, growing up, and we had to have in school 1 hour of Islam class. So I was taught sort of the different stories in Quran, which is their holy book, and also living in it, experiencing sort of the
The
religious
culture.
leaders,
Hmm.
the culture, exactly, their mosques, and the way people get treated. So all that sort of, I had a different um, sort of training and understanding of what truly was Judaism and Christianity, and they're not the same. So how Islam describes Christians and Judaism
Hmm.
is different. The teaching doesn't is not consistent with the teaching in the Bible, for both Old Testament and New Testament. So I
Hmm.
was very confused. So when I came to the United States, and again, I believe that was God's, intervention to bring us here and put me in front of a very Christian-minded family. And the wife was the one that really continues to be a strong Christian and strong faith. So she started, speaking to me and educating me. What is it to be a Christian? What Jesus did. So in
Right.
Islam, it's thought that he's a good prophet, that he was not crucified, and he did not ascended to heaven. That the salvation doesn't come through Jesus. That he's not the Son of God. That it wasn't a virgin birth. So that's sort of okay. I said what? So what I was
Yeah.
hearing. So I started reading the Bible, and I said, okay, so someone is not telling the truth.
Right. It opened the door for questions.
It opened the door for many questions. That's why I wanted to write this book, and that's why I had this passion to write this book many years ago. But
Yeah.
one of the reason I was hesitant, and again, finally, I just God spoke to me and said it's time to write it. And again, I don't want to offend people. I don't want to offend other religions, and this is not the purpose of it. It's not to offend and say, we're better, you're better. We're all we're all God's children, and I want people with love and passion to really open their mind and tell me where I'm going wrong, and challenge me with respect to what I have written in this book and other books. So that's sort of the purpose of it. So that's sort of where I was and why. Just to me, there's no question in my mind that God's revelation is in Judaism and Christianity, and they go both together. You can't have one without the other. They both have to be together. And that's my sort of prayer, is for people to learn to ask questions and really know who Jesus is.
Yeah. The whole subject is fascinating and I'm intrigued. I love the idea of the book. I love the premise of the book. And we are actually out of time. Before we go, though, Ray, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to share before we close down the interview today?
I just want to share one quote from Billy Graham, who I respect and love
Hmm.
what he had done with evangelical work. But I put this in the book, and it's my last chapter, actually, the last page of the book. And this is what Billy Graham says, and I love what how he quotes. He says, "You may be Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. You may be Hindu, Muslim. Whatever your background, you may not have. Whatever your background, you may not have any religion. Also,
Yeah.
you come to Christ. I'm not asking you to come to a particular church. I'm asking you to come to the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, that to me, basically, it's the whole essence of this book.
Yeah.
It's not about Hindu and Muslims and this and that. It's really about Jesus Christ, and that's I wanted to leave that, and hopefully people can sort of think about it and do their homework and do their own research.
Yeah. I love that. Go ahead and show us that book again. And for all of you out there, what is God's revelation? And you'll need to get this book from Amazon. I think it would be a great Bible study. It's a great book, especially if you live. I come from Michigan. There's a big concentration of Muslim people in Michigan. There's different pockets of different types of religious beliefs in different parts of our country. If you live in an area where you maybe rub shoulders with someone who has a different religion than you, I would encourage you to get this book and look at it, and look at it from the way that Ray is explaining it. You know, it's not something, we're not better. We just want them to open the dialogue and take a look, because if they start looking and they start knocking, we know the Bible says that Jesus is there, and if we he's knocking at the door, and he'll if we open it, he'll come in. So appreciate that, Ray. I appreciate the time that you spent with me today. And I thank you for writing the book. Thank you for the first two books. I'm looking forward. I know that there's many more out there probably that you're going to end up writing, and I'm looking forward to it. And I hope that we'll be able to connect in the future in regards to those as well. So go and get the book for those of you who are watching. And we need to close down today. But I hope that you've enjoyed speaking with our author as much as I have. I hope that you take advantage of the opportunity to grab this book. And we want to thank our author, our sponsor, yourauthorhub.com, for making this podcast and this video cast happen. And be sure, as I mentioned, go over to Amazon and grab that book. God bless you. And thanks, Ray, for being a guest with me today. And for all of you out there watching the Author Spotlight, we'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.